from our last episode on re-identification how much of a fail that is. But there's even more. Even in the healthcare space, data specifically under jurisdiction of the HIPAA statute, the de-identification standard is failing us. HIPAA specifically specifies how an org can de-identify data and thereby gain safe harbor from prosecution in the case of a data breach. But is that the de-identification standard working? Some friends from MePrism shared with me a new white paper they're releasing. Bo Williamson and Mary Daly, MD, summarized, in order to determine the efficacy of safe harbor standard for medical record de-identification under the U.S. Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, we performed a literature review on PubMed and Google Scholar. Re-identification rates ranged from 0.01% to 57.5%. Thus, the safe harbor standard is not sufficient to protect patients' confidential medical records, exposing a major gap in HIPAA. Interesting. I'll share that link with you folks. But I'm here with my co-host, Christian Kmeyer, managing partner of Sustany Capital. Chris runs a VC fund that focuses on blockchain tech, and he has a big interest in privacy, identity, and the future of money. He's also doing some amazing work on debunking central bank digital currencies. Say hello, Chris.
Hey, Jeff. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you. How you doing?
I'm not entirely sure we're streaming the right thing as usual, but we're gonna figure it out eventually. Right now, I'm just a disembodied voice on the screen, apparently. But yeah, I'm also your disc jockey today. As usual. In the future we're going to change that, but yeah, Jeff and I are working on fixing the interwebs so that the rest of the world can live a happier and healthier life.
Excellent. Well, Chris, we've got a great panel for our audience today. 3 panelists, actually. We've got George Matthew, the Chief Medical Officer from Dataless North America. Say hi, George.
Hi, George. No, hey, Jeff, how are you doing? Sorry, it was too easy. Hey, everyone. I'm George Matthew. I'm an internal medicine physician, but I also work as Jeff said, the Chief Medical Officer for a large health IT company, mostly based out of Europe, but now the U.S.
Awesome.
Chris, Jeff, thank you for having me on.
Excellent. We're glad you're here. We've also got Dana Rivkin, Principal Cloud Architect and Lady Justice for the People. Maybe you could sort of expand on that a little bit for us, Dana.
Sure. Hi. Dana Rivkin, nice to meet y'all. Thank you for having me here. I have an interesting insight into the justice side of healthcare and the connections and some of the things going on with our data. And I also have a personal connection in my family. My father was a criminal defense attorney and grew up, in the courtrooms, watching him and at his office a lot on summers and, days off from school. So I've always had a deep interest in that area, and there's a lot of interconnection and, the ability to take advantage and potentially even harm people. And so I'm here to talk about that today, and anything else that you might want to hear about.
Excellent. Well, we want to hear those insights. And we've also got Saima Fancy, Senior Privacy Advisor for TELUS Health. Saima, say hello.
Hi, everyone. So happy to be here. Yes, my name is Saima. I am a chemical engineer and a biochemist by academia. From environmental consulting to civil litigation to manufacturing engineering and now to data privacy has been my journey. I currently work as a senior privacy advisor at TELUS Health in the data and trust office, working on everything to do with big data in the health tech sector, TELUS being a primary player in the electronic medical records space in Canada and soon entering America. So very excited to be on the privacy and cybersecurity side of things there.
Excellent. What a broad reach we've got here with this panel. This is awesome. So let's start off a little bit here with some sort of news that sort of broke this week. So it appears the world's richest man, who owns Amazon, a company that knows a heck of a lot about each of us based upon our shopping habits, wants to buy One Medical, a healthcare company, so that apparently they can treat all of our medical problems as well as sell us virtually everything under the sun. This actually seems like a pretty great synergy, a pretty great business strategy. If we're not thinking about our privacy, maybe, right? So why should we worry if Amazon wants to eat the world and perhaps our privacy along with it? What's the problem with the One Medical deal? Who wants to weigh in first? Maybe, I don't know, Dana, do you want to give us your thoughts there?
Sure. So I haven't thought a lot about the Amazon deal specifically. This just happened, but working for Oracle, Oracle just acquired Cerner, and Cerner creates the software for hospitals and the systems that are in place. So there's a little bit of a connection there. We don't know yet what Amazon intends to do with their access to that, and it is a bit concerning. My goal with my background in healthcare throughout my journey in technology and my past 20-25 years of doing this, I'm very close to the database side, and started as a database administrator when I got into the database area, and that expanded, and I've had a lot of time to work within the big tech arena as well, and it's given me an opportunity to work in both public and private sector, also in the healthcare space, such as the Veterans Affairs account, where the National Data Warehouse, and that's something that even Oracle is looking, or talking about now, is having this national healthcare database for the private sector, because we haven't had that. Everything is very disparate and all over the place. We don't have a record in one location to take with us. My interest in the healthcare space has to do with the focus that I've had back since I worked for United Health Group when I first saw this, my first database administrator job, and I was like, this is a problem, and we have to fix this at someday. And at that point, we hadn't had the data explosion. There wasn't really a lot going on with the sale of data that hadn't become what it is today. I think that was around maybe 2005 timeframe. So it was still early in the industry in terms of this web explosion and the data explosion. But I see the issue on the database side, and I see all of the challenges that we're having across privacy, identity, and data and security, which are my core focus areas, and identity being directly correlated with healthcare, and healthcare being the place that I identified this as well. So I've explored across the cryptocurrency and blockchain and technologies, from starting out in hardware and working through appliances and cloud and architecture, engineering. And so I have a very broad, very, very, very broad scale insight into the landscape. But I also have some personal experiences that I've come across that are concerning, to say the least. So as far as Amazon, again, back to that, that's I have the same, the same fears that I guess I would have for Oracle as well, that if we do not implement this properly, because I saw the issues even on the VA side in our national healthcare system, and we all know about the breaches that have happened with OPM and even the VA breach recently. So there's not, there's got to be a way to fix this, like on the privacy engineering side. That was a few episodes ago that you guys talked about that. it's a little bit more than just privacy engineering in what we're doing today. We need to transform and re-engineer it in a way. We actually need to reverse engineer. To solve problems, we have to look at the root cause, and the root cause is our data. And the hacking problems are databases and getting access. And when I refer to database, I'm even referring to big data storage. Wherever it is, it's a collection of data, and you can get access to that large collection of data very quickly because it's all in one place. And not only you're not just getting one person, you're getting everybody, because it's that user table that's multiplied exponentially all over the globe. And every time you have to sign up somewhere, you're handing out that information again. And it's just the number of passwords that we're managing and are getting stored on our phones. And there's a lot of challenges there going on. So that's my interest is in reforming, redesigning, and laying out a new architecture and really creating something different than what we're doing today, and changing that mindset.
That makes sense. Saima, let's get your thoughts on this. Could Amazon pull this off if they privacy engineered a solution to keep this data separate, or is that an impossibility? Chris Kmeyer likes to say that the problem is really databases. We've got all this data out there, and if you keep it in databases, it's never going to be solved. So,
Yeah. No, picking on your point and Dana's point about privacy engineering, a few episodes ago when you had Michelle on, I truly believe the solution is within privacy engineering. And look, data is everywhere. People are giving it away for free. I think Amazon acquiring this particular business is not only a natural progression in technological advancement, but perhaps a good one, especially when it comes to helping out marginalized communities in technological advancement, but perhaps have a universal healthcare system, which has its problems. It has a lot of broken issues, but in America, from what I understand, marginalized communities don't have access to proper healthcare. And perhaps if Amazon, a company that has so much technological advancements, capability of analytics at its fingertips, and it's faced punitive measures in both the EU and the US. Perhaps it's learned that Data for Good is an initiative that it should engage in. I believe, I'm an optimist, that it can actually help those communities profoundly, especially in the areas of algorithmic bias, in racism within the medical industry, which is quite prevalent. So I'd like to think it's a good marriage between the two.
It's interesting. George? Yeah, George. What are your thoughts? Where do you fall
here? I
here?
should have gone before Dana and Saima, because I'm going to sound like a jerk now after those two.
That's okay, George. I have more. Go for it.
My concern, Saima, I think everything you and Dana both said is perfectly valid. But being the cynic that still sees patients part-time, I'm actually concerned about the opposite, where it actually might limit access more. Because of the fact that Amazon using its big data analytics, getting a new variety of data that it hasn't had access to before, and then using that in some of its models may actually cause it to segment that market, price products and services sometimes out of the reach of folks, and maybe even lock people out. I was reading, and I'll probably refer to it because, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a doctor, but I was reading an article that just came out in Duke Law recently, where they were talking about, especially for marginalized communities, these sets of data are so unique that adding that on to what you know from a marketing sense actually helps to re-identify them faster. And
sure, machine learning accomplishes that easily.
Yeah.
Right. So,
yep.
and Amazon has multiple efforts, right? Not just in one medical, but they had purchased PillPack before, so they have a pharmacy. Yeah. They just announced that they're doing breast and skin cancer vaccines, right? And there's a play here, right? Using data multiple ways and monetizing it multiple ways, especially in the US, unfortunately. the concern I have is that there are folks whose data will be used and monetized, but that doesn't guarantee access to those treatments for them, right? So that's my concern with Amazon, not because they're doing anything different than anybody in the US for healthcare now. They're just able to do it more efficiently and faster.
But agreed, George, but I'd like to counter by saying that data is already available to Amazon.
It's true.
Right? Through PillPack, through Whole Foods, they have it. They're just saying that they're going to be able to channel it for a more precise purpose. And a lot of companies are already working in that realm. I mean, surveillance economy is robust, right? With driverless cars, it's already out there. I'm saying don't stop it, regulate it, contain it, and let the advocates speak loud and clear. We can't stop technological advancements. What we need to focus on is get regulations to catch up.
Because I agree with you. The data's already out there. The fact that we've got a law in the US like HIPAA, right, which is 25 years old, and we have to make workarounds around national patient identifiers, because back in the day it was a bad thing, but now with 5 points of data I can re-identify you anyways.
Absolutely.
It's dated, but my concern for that also is that it's still kind of in bad faith. Like, you know, a lot of healthcare systems and digital health apps for that matter do the same thing. You know, you sign your end user license agreement, which is 500 pages. You don't really read it. You just hit the accept button, and you didn't realize you gave away your firstborn, your left kidney, your car, because it was buried in the text. But I guess more importantly, whether I go to a hospital or I'm using a behavioral health app, or, you know, a women's health app for that matter, though if I start using it, you guys can yell at me about that because I probably shouldn't be. But I guess the whole thing of it is that data is not the same as going to a clinician. And whether it's a hospital or a healthcare system or an app, now that you've basically signed away that data without knowing it, and they can now use and build it any way they want to. And I don't think that's the tacit consent that most patients understand when they go into the hospital. Most people just go home, right?
So let me, here's where when these terms and condition things that come up everywhere, when I look at them, I just think that's illegal, and I accept it anyway. And I go for it, because as far as I'm concerned, every time my health data and my personal data is trafficked, that's human trafficking. And that's exactly what's going on with our information. So there's targeting, labeling, lying even in medical records going on. And if we don't have access, insights, including the auditing insights, you know, a database has all of this, and it shouldn't be a company that is managing all of it. Each individual self should have its own contained in what I'm calling the personal cloud, like the PC.
Right.
You know, we need a personal cloud. We have a public cloud, we have a private cloud, we have this hybrid cloud. Where's the people cloud? You know, we're all caught up in this fourth industrial revolution, or whatever you want to call it. Where is the people revolution?
Well, that's where the Web3 revolution comes into play, right? Using NFTs to close up your personal record. So you give it away, you monetize it. What I'm saying, and I guess this is my engineering background speaking, let's embrace the technology to limit the bad actors. Let's make our regulations robust. For example, we just had a federal bill tabled. I think it's going to pass. It's quite robust. Finally, de-identified data is considered a use. For the longest time, it was an use. Anonymized data is not use. Anonymized data is not use. Well, that's a loophole in regulation. Let's fix that, because the tech companies are evolving at a lightning speed. We can't stop them.
I mean, regulation is one thing. I think, you know, we need some of that, but there's too much focus on the law side of it. Versus,
I think there's not enough, personally.
Well, what I don't think is enough is the governance and standards within the tech community. We are the ones that can implement those standards and governance, and, you know, put that in place. Redesign a database so that it's for a per individual, and have data schemas that are public, that are standard, like Microsoft did with their what was it called? The data it's there. It's in GitHub. They have their, the schemas that they've partnered with Adobe and some others to put together. What is a product? What is what are the good tables for that? The information about a person is all in healthcare. We've got the data dictionary for the healthcare side. I mean, it's all there. And if that was standardized and you had your patient record in a database with all of the schemas for all the other systems that you interact with, these should be interfaces that we're dealing with. And every interface should have the person that's, that is interacting with the interface. That data should be contained within that person's
exactly. That's why
the way you're describing it, it's more than just a cloud, right? It's more than just a repository. It's actually a platform. It's like a platform.
A data lake, right? I mean, you want the whole thing. And I've actually—
But the complexities with data lakes too, right? Or then you're dealing with unstructured versus structured data. How are we aggregating that?
Well, for instance, Oracle has an autonomous database that's converged. Not only can it reach big data, storage data on file, it can do machine learning. It can also connect to data on a different cloud. And all of this is contained within one database that you can query and access information, build applications on. I mean, go to the core learning in school and think about a computer class where you're learning about your own personal cloud, your own virtual cloud, basically your networking, security,
right?
The database vaults and
Dana, I'm just going to pick up on that point. You raise a really, really good point, and that's along the lines of data literacy. We need to teach our children data literacy. Daniel Solov talks a lot about that, where he's designed a program for kids to learn how to manage your data. Some of the courses that are not taught in high school is, hey, how do you do budgeting? How do you apply for a mortgage? Like that. Now we must teach the kids, what does it mean to manage your data? What is your personal data? What is cloud computing? What is on-prem computing? Our population does not understand it because we haven't taught it to them. And there's some fundamental problems. For example, there are communities who don't have broadband. In Canada, in the northern indigenous communities, forget 3G, 5G, they're not on any G, for example, right? There is no runway for those communities to access virtual care. I'm saying let's target those problems with technological solutions. At the same time, hold big tech accountable via the vehicles of rights. Sorry, George.
That problem that you actually highlighted, I think Web3, there are some solutions that are being built towards them.
Absolutely. There are some. A lot of holes, Joe.
Well, I'm talking to a couple of folks in Africa that are working on, mostly in Nigeria and some of the other countries that are working on
folks down there,
Web3 solutions, because they have a very similar problem, right? There's not a lot of broadband. Yes, they have cellular, but they also don't have a lot of great resources. So then the individual has to house their data, and they end up having to have some type of platform that can interface with the local hospital systems, EHR, but at the same time, ends up being on the person because they end up being the only consistent factor in their care as they go throughout the system. And, to your points, complementary to that, I think part of the thing that needs to happen here in the States is promoting that type of business model because I think in the end, it's all incentives here, right? I wish we were more good-natured here in the States and that privacy was a right. But I think someone pointed out to me once that while privacy is seen as a human right everywhere else here, it's seen as a feature and a premium feature at that. So, you have to make the problem fit. So creating a business model that allows for collaboration with the patient to share their data, to exchange for potentially financial or other types of redress so that data can be used multiple ways. I think that there's something there where ultimately, patients will now, to your literacy point, it's very difficult for me as a doc to explain to people about, why they need to control their diabetes sometimes, right? They don't feel it unless it gets bad. They don't see it unless they have to take their insulin. It's invisible. Same thing with high blood pressure. But if I'm able to tie that to something, let's say financial, right? I may not understand the uh, the incidence and prevalence and the pathophysiology of diabetes in my system, nor do I may not understand how it affects my eyes, my kidneys, or my nerves, but I can definitely understand it's going to cost me anywhere from $5,000 to $7,000 a year. That I understand, and that might be the trigger I need, or one of them, to change my behavior. Again, obviously it could be family members. It could, if I want to live to see my daughter's wedding, or it might be something else. But I think those are the building blocks, right? Having your data, creating a way that it can be literate, but also useful in certain business situations, so that, you have incentive, not just financial, but just internally, to maintain that data or that database of you.
Exactly. So it's around creating a culture of such understanding, right? There's a fantastic book that a lot of you may know about. It's called Privacy's Power by Carissa Belize, and she talks about how people willy-nilly go ahead and get their DNA samples done without getting express consent of their family members. Well, your second cousin, third removed from this side, needed to be consulted before you gave away your DNA sample, because there are real life examples of people being denied jobs, loans, etc., because of their connection to a bad actor within their family. They didn't know. In complete innocence, they gave away their spit sample or whatever it was, right? So what I'm saying is, we can't stop big tech, but what we can do is educate our people. And we need to do it ASAP, and it starts with the children.
No,
and
so I'd say we can and we will stop big tech. And I don't know why the monitor is not changing to my face when I say stuff, so I'm doing something wrong on my end. So this episode, I'm going to be the voice in the background for no particular reason. Anywho, no, but Jeff aggregated a database of what I consider to be targets, so all data brokers, basically. Because so there's two elements here to make this very simple. So we need to clean up this thing that I call the digital landfill, that people used to refer to as the World Wide Web. What's important to understand is you're not on the World Wide Web. We have never built the World Wide Web. We built the commercial web. And with that commercial web came a certain incentive mechanism. So the incentive mechanism of distributing your data is more often than not some commercial interest, i.e. ultimately increasing shareholder value. As an externality, whenever you're engaging with these solutions, you're an oracle function, you're a non-player character. You're not gonna be in a position to set the objective of whatever you want to achieve by engaging with that technology if it accesses your quote-unquote data. Ultimately, it's not about the data. Right, so no one is really interested in maintaining large data pools. They're interested in how they can use this to achieve their own objectives. But that's my point there. So we need to create a network of mapped cryptographic primitives and retire all databases. Ultimately, you can't protect a database, and ultimately we need to create an agency attribution layer that can actually determine if, when, where your agency, so your ability to set your own agenda, is being breached by someone else who's controlling that information pool, being able to exert more influence over yourself than you could because of that large information deficit. So you don't have that information that is available to these algorithms, which is the secondary layer here. And that's why what's interesting is, and then I shut up on this topic, but what's interesting here is that for the first time very recently, we saw a court decide that a certain algorithm had to be deleted. So that speaks to usage of data, right? Because the request of deleting data is kind of quaint. Anything digitally observed can't really technically be deleted, as we know.
Yeah, I think, Chris, I agree there. One of the things that our panelists sort of brought up here is the concept of this personal cloud, and sort of hinted at the whole concept of sovereign identity and agency. And I think that's where we're headed. And eventually I think we get there. I think maybe it's not so much that we need to stop companies like Amazon from buying One Medical as it is that we need to really understand what health data is and what privacy functions need to be regulated. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a heavy hand of regulation, but we have to understand what privacy functionality we need. And the question I wanted to get to next really is, have we even defined health data effectively, right? I mean, I don't think that HIPAA doesn't really control our health data. It really only regulates covered entities, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
So there's a huge gap there.
Well, it doesn't even actually protect our health data. There are nearly a dozen exceptions.
Right.
That's right.
You do not, and they will not tell you.
Right.
Not only that, our health data is being stored in the Justice Department and in police records and things like that. You know, you call and about a health thing, it goes in a 911 record. Now police even have access to redact your HIPAA information, not tell you what they're redacting, and they can redact whatever they want and just put a HIPAA stamp on it. And I even have an example of a modified police report, where it was one version one time and another version the next time, and somehow the words highly intelligent became a HIPAA privacy thing. So
That's interesting.
Is it like an application
the
of like
narrative
or something?
What's that?
Is this an application of the Patriot Act or something where they can redact or something from national security?
I don't know how they're getting away with this. They can redact based on a couple things. They have a few legal areas where they can redact. So there's obviously some legal component to it, but they put HIPAA, it'll be like a stamp there that says that it was redacted for HIPAA. But when they do something like that, like remove highly intelligent, and it may not seem like a lot, but when you look at what it read before they removed that, to what it read afterwards, it changes the narrative completely from, is this person, having a health problem that needs help, or is this person a dangerous criminal? And they can target and do things like that. So, but our health information should not be in those systems. Not only that, how do we dispute if something is wrong in the health information? I actually have another example of two hospitals that have incorrect information on my profile in my records, and they, with the request to change it, have refused that. Now I have to go. Now I have to go through HHS and try and appeal this through them that my civil rights are being violated. It's a nightmare. This huge, all these loopholes that I'm having to go through. But now there's these things on my record that
you can't get rid of. It's like a credit.
Get rid of, and who knows how they're
agency report, right? Like they used to have the old commercials for, I think it was Experian or TransUnion, where you would try to call to correct an error on your credit report, and it would just go to like a reel-to-reel computer from the 1970s.
Yeah.
And it would kind of answer and say, sorry, please leave your message and we'll get back to you sometime.
Never. Yeah.
So this email thread that I started with the compliance department, it was quite lengthy, and she realized, I guess, at some point that she was not going to satisfy any of my questions or any of my concerns about the fact that they have this incorrect information in my profile that could be potentially negatively used against me.
Yeah.
And they're not disclosing who is getting access to this information completely either.
And your health insurance, your prescriptions, anything that uses that data, right? Your quantified risk score within the insurance company has gone up for an error.
Oh, my risk score is like
high.
Yeah.
Oh,
maybe you shouldn't say that on this, just because this is going on YouTube. You don't want to.
Oh, I know. I've already. I guess you could say I'm a bit of a social tester. So I'm a target. If that's
similar to your example, Dana, wouldn't you say that this is happening beyond the healthcare sector as well, within the insurance sector and the surveillance economy in the auto sector? I mean, if you are to opt in to buy a driverless car, lot of your data goes in that route, right?
I would recommend, or I suggest, if you'd like to read on my profile, there is the Venus Tech Bill of Rights. I tried to make it a little fun, and I used the Wonder Woman persona, so a lot of
I love that.
with the golden lasso, and I speak my mind. So anyway,
see, that's what we need to be. We need to be Marvel superheroes in this sector, right?
That's exactly right.
Teach people, right? We need to bring to their attention, hey, we need something like GDPR in North America ASAP.
You know, why couldn't, I wrote about this last night, actually, why couldn't, when, this all ties back to healthcare. You get a birth certificate when you're born. That's health, right? Eventually, if you're, then you're connected with state. And why aren't we connected with individuals? Why don't we have an advocate team? And they don't even have to have our identity. Why don't I have like an advocate police officer in my local area, plus maybe another one in another region, right? Because you should have a backup, digital twins, things like that. But why can't I be Wonder Woman? They just know that I'm Wonder Woman, and this person's Batman, and this is Superman, and whatever. And it gives a different of that like cycle part of the targeting and the discrimination and
and then it's getting terribly complicated as we enter into the metaverse world, right?
Yeah.
And as people are going to have dual, if not more, personalities with their avatars and whatnot. Again, I'll come back to regulations. I'll come back to societal norms. I'll come back to societal reconstructs of what we considered normal to be changed. And that's hard. A lot of people don't want to do that. So they say, oh, stop big tech. But wait, no, I think we need to look at the core problems in our society and look at that, because bias, racism has always existed. It's just taken a new form in terms of technological advancements, right?
Yes.
For example, colored people have always been second fiddle to getting, say, medical care than those who are not. Now you've got algorithms who won't allow a black man to move up into the scale of getting his cardiac care versus a white man. Yeah. It's the same problem. It's just a different form. I'm saying we have to reckon with the roots of our evil. It's a philanthropic, philosophical issue with technology as its cover-up.
We are not using technology properly at all. I mean, this is an evolution. Absolutely. And you could read even something else on my GitHub. It's a little bit older. It's kind of like one of my many manifestos that have been written. But my cousin is someone who is deeply ingrained in our economic society, this capitalist human capital society. You may have heard of him. His name is Gary Becker. And so it's interesting. The work he did was to bring economics and social sciences together.
Sure.
And that includes discrimination and, all of the things that criminal law and criminal behavior, and I can't get into the stuff he does is like extremely complicated, but I feel like I'm the extension to that. I'm the next generation to Gary Becker, challenging this, the way that we're handling human capital and how it's affecting people.
Dana, Simon, I do want to get back to Jeff's question. It's an interesting one, right? Which is, are we classifying data properly, right? And
No.
it's a tough one. I agree. I don't think we are, but I feel like we're not classifying data or covered entities or processors properly, like because again, we're working with old definitions. No one seemed to think that anybody outside of the healthcare system, at least in the U.S., would ever want this data. And now you've got everybody looking at this data for multiple reasons. So, right now it's been classified, and there are exceptions, right? Like if you have de-identified, sorry, I smiled because if your Bytes Your Rights, if you've de-identified it based on the HIPAA rule, then it's okay, which it's really not because it can be re-identified right away.
Usually.
But I think we need to figure out if there's a way to have some type of evolved law that allows for the technologies that move so fast and identifies that, okay, in this situation, you are using it for healthcare. It may be health supplements. It may be GPS data that's showing you're going to the gym or the doctor's office. But now I have a picture of your health. So I can do things like risk score your insurance, maybe deny care, maybe make your drugs more expensive. Mm-hmm. That needs to be some type of line to say, okay, now you've crossed into that. you can't use it for that purpose.
Sure. You're talking about semantics and linguistics, and you are so correct, George. And that's something, for example, the GDPR, it has its problems, but what it does do well is, for example, define what is a data subject, what are its rights, what is a data controller, what is a data processor. We need that language to infiltrate our privacy environment in North America, and we don't have that. And in the US, you folks are so varied state to state to state, and the federal law is yet to come. We have our problems also province to province to province. We do have a federal law coming that's going to unify us, hopefully. But that's what we're lacking. It comes down to linguistics, right? We need that common understanding. We need standards to allow us also say, when I say a dog, the word dog, are we talking about a Vizsla, a poodle, or whatnot, right? What I'm saying is we need to streamline understanding. So when I use the word privacy, I hope we all have the same understanding of the word privacy. It's not secrecy. Right? It's not that I'm telling on you. What is it? And back to Jeff's point, we're lacking that understanding.
And it's interesting you point out also that you've had the multiple states all trying to, we've got multiple efforts from states trying to put together privacy laws. Obviously, California is one of the more famous ones, but Virginia, Texas, they're all starting to realize that their constituents are concerned. And yet at the federal level, we've had so many starts and stops over the last couple of years, even before the pandemic, but especially with the pandemic, when contact tracing was starting to come to the fore. I think that's where the importance of privacy came out because, and this goes to the point of agency that you made, Chris, right? When the initial ask was for people to share their information on their phone so they could be contact traced, right? And Apple and Google came together in some, first time event where they were allowing data sharing. And to be fair, the engineers did their best to a degree to try to create a privacy preserving approach to how the data would be handled. And it was clever. But then the initial response was not even tepid. It was almost non-existent because nobody trusted the tech companies with their data. And
so the big failure.
Right, because, there needs to be the ability to choose what data you want to share and not if you want to build trust. And especially in healthcare, trust is paramount for us to be able to determine how do we take care of you. But then what we're seeing, at least in the States, is an erosion of that trust, precisely because not only are tech companies and digital health companies taking advantage of that trust to gather this data and monetize it, but even incumbent health companies are doing the same. And it makes it difficult when I'm trying not to be crude because it's not my podcast, but typically when you're going to take somebody in, take care of them and charge them a huge bill and then take their data, you should probably buy them dinner first. Sorry.
Yeah, so there's a primary conflation here that underlies all of these discussions, which is the confusion about laws and rules. And so what I mean by that specifically, so I used to be a lawyer many moons ago, but before that I was an engineer. So laws are things that you discover and that actually exist. Rules are those things that politicians make, and you need to make rules when the laws fail. So what do I mean by that? So the laws are those things that you can engage with in technology. Technology just deals with actual laws first and foremost. So that's the first question is, should I create this data? Then how should I, quote unquote, store this data? So in the legacy system, you got read, edit, delete, access, copy.
Sure.
And so the new paradigm has to be that it's created in a way that only you get to have the one and only copy and the access rights to that as a default position. So back to the days basically before we invented database solutions, before the 60s. That's always the metaphor that I offer people. So there's a huge difference because rules are designed to make people engage or not engage in a particular ways with technologies. That's just a backstop because you already created this moral hazard. That's why you need the rules, because you created moral hazard with someone else having control over this particular information in our particular example here. So it's kind of the difference between you make rules for every citizen that they should only drive their car 65 miles an hour. Well, if you actually want people to only drive 65 miles an hour, you pick the 37 car companies that are there and tell them, make only cars that drive 65 miles an hour. You're done, sure. Right? So it's a pretty obvious direction here that we need to do. And
Right.
then simultaneously, if when where we are creating new data, that needs to invalidate the old data. So as in, now I have a complete set of records, let's say, of my whatever that is. Let's call it kidney, my facial recognition, and so forth. I have the one legitimate copy, and by virtue of that, all other copies, all other things that are exist out there, all this thing in things in the digital landfill are invalid. I declare them to be invalid.
Correct.
So, Chris,
Right, but
I want to
we
ask.
don't have rules and laws that allow that to be operationalized, right? And we need to implement that. And George, to your point, data is not the real currency we're talking about here. Data trust is. Trust is the currency that
that's an important point, actually. So what we're working towards trustless systems, as in it's a difference between don't be evil and cannot be evil. We need to insist on cannot be evil, right?
They need to be autonomous and understood how they function with processes that, you have a workflow of how it gets approved to even be changed, right? The system functions in a certain way. We need to regulate these machines, not regulate the people.
Right.
It's like completely backwards.
But to be fair to the way you described it, it's almost a Toyota production system poka-yoke, right? You can't lie. The system doesn't allow you to. It basically takes your information and then allows you to, either display it, share it, or not. Though, Chris, I do have a kind of use case I'd be curious to ask you about, because one of the things that came out with, whether you're talking COVID or even back with HIV back in the 80s, is the public health aspect there of it. Yeah. Because if you were, let's say we had this editing capability back in the day, and with the issues with, being diagnosed with HIV at the time, the blowback was so bad that they had to put laws in place specifically to keep that information private, right? And even if you go away from that, if you go with syphilis or herpes or some of the other things, these are all things that are publicly reported specifically to try to control or reduce outbreaks. But in the system that we're describing, there is basically self-sovereignty. If it's going to keep me from getting a job, maybe finding a partner or whatnot, do I give that self-sovereignty the ability to edit that information out, knowing it could potentially hurt other people?
There's really no other option. Otherwise, you're creating a pre-crime system.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, and that's very dangerous.
Okay.
Well, guys, think about this though, right? I mean, we're talking about these systems sort of like writ large, but if you think about what Chris is talking about with rules versus laws, it might be easier to understand conceptually if you think about it in terms of like just one data point. So think about maybe your COVID status, right? Whether you've been vaccinated or not. Pretend that's just an on-off bit. If you think about information as just being a piece of data, and that's sort of how we think about it, like a cell in a spreadsheet, right? If it's in a data set like that, it can be copied and copied and copied. It's freely moved around, right? But if you think about data as actually being securable, right? So that if that data isn't just a bit, but rather actually has security around it, right? So that it maybe has a consent framework, it has, encryption around it, so that whenever that actually gets shared, right, it actually says, hey, this actually self-destructs after a certain amount of time, and it's only openable by George, right, and not openable by Dana, right? And it has certain usage rights along with it. That's actually possible.
The blockchain.
That's what we need to build, right?
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. Leveraging blockchain technology, allowing the data subject to have control over their records so they can lock it away and use their encryption keys and give it to George, their doctor, to say, okay, I give you permission to look at it, and then lock it up.
Right.
But we have it. We have the capability.
And if it's stored and being audited properly, that you see those insights, you can give access to whoever you want. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, anybody can see it. As long as I can see you seeing my data. There needs to be accountability and traceability. Otherwise, you've got a mob system behind you that are doing things, and you can't see what's happening behind the scenes. The people that are running conspiracies, and they are happening. But I'd like to share a couple images if I could, because I think for myself, images are extremely helpful. And there's one particularly right here. So this was my original version, and I'm sorry, I'll have to get rid of this here. But what I came up with earlier this year was, how do we contain, this is the person private cloud that I envisioned, this is an old like appliance system, and how do we make sure that we have our civil rights, our human rights, our justice, that there's a trigger that goes off if somebody tries to get into your information and then they don't have access. Does that go immediately to an attorney and a judge, or, is a case logged, is something like that protects your contained information? And even further, in my first version here, when I still wasn't sure how blockchain should take place in this. And then I have another version where every person has their own blockchain, which that was too much. But you can see, if you have your information in this private cloud, you have your own personal like security bot guy, which should be over here. And then you've got, different entities and services out here that want to collect your information. They want to run some aggregations and get some insights on the data. And this is, the way that I envision a high level, future of this information. But even further, when we look at, how we use data today and our things versus our people, and separating those entities so that there's interfaces. You've got a health manager, you've got your money manager and social and things like this. And when you're interacting with these services and things, your information is stored in your database, and the things and people that you're interacting with, they can also see into your database. It's kind of like flipping the narrative and flipping the image of how we're doing it today. Right now we're caught in a box. We're all in here, on the right hand side instead of separate. And then in the center, having, maybe it's city to national to global, types of indexing services, and maybe it's some kind of synthetic data and other different types of hashing systems that help protect those, those identification ways of being able to de-identify or re-identify, data. Why shouldn't you have your GPS information, and then AT&T can just see it if they need to? And if they do see it, you're going to know that they saw it, and you might be able to send them a little chat message like, hey, why were you guys looking at my information?
Or AT&T needs to come to you and ask for permission, and then it's up to you whether you're going to give that key, the private key, to them to decrypt, right?
There you go, exactly. And that's where, we get these network and security engineers and architects together to flip this around. It's all in the infrastructure and the design and how we're doing things today.
That's right. We're talking about multiple decentralized networks that can support federated learning, which would be fantastic. Even our National Academies of Medicine were talking about this as a continuous learning system is one of the things that they think should happen. But the difficulty we seem to have, and this is where technologies like blockchain are trying to help, are disintermediating the intermediary, right? A lot of our business models are based on, I'm the guy in the center, I'm the troll under the bridge, you pay me to get to the other side, and as long as I keep everything centralized, I'm good. I feel like this is fantastic, and I would like to see something like this happen in my lifetime. I'm not going to say it, but we also need to change the financial incentives to support it, where it's actually makes sense for a group of people to get together and have the financial incentives aligned enough so that they participate in these multiple networks versus being aggregated into a centralized party that has no, they don't answer to anyone. It's the
and just building off of your point, so something like the financial sector that has the interact system, for example, you go to your online banking, you have view only, you have the permissions to send an e-transfer to whoever you want, and on the other end you give them a password for retrieve it. If interact can do it for the financial sector, what can it be done for the healthcare sector? It can. Yeah. The answer is yes, it can, but it hasn't been initiated as such, and that's why I think companies like Amazon, Google, all of them can do this. They need to be held accountable, right? It's at their fingertips.
You nailed it in one there, Simon, right? For financial systems to work, there has to be accountability that my money went from point A to point B, because if it doesn't, not only do I not trust it, but they're liable for it.
Right.
Data that doesn't exist, right?
But it can, is my point.
It's my property, so I can do with it as I will. I mean, in the United States, at least for healthcare systems, I think all but one state, once the hospital gets your data, it's their property to do with as they wish. It's their art that they can transform it. And it's interesting when I've sat in and talked to people about it, the hospitals just feel like it's theirs to do with. And there are several consortiums now that are, point blank, aggregating their data to allow life sciences companies to query against it because it's another revenue source.
Without any consent management frameworks in place, right?
It's
not their data.
Exactly.
It's not. And if you,
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
That's where circle of care frameworks do come in and help. Well, I mean, if somebody's comatose, they're not going to be able to get onto this interact system and e-transfer you their medical record, right? I get that. There have to be these provisions in place.
Well, think about it. Do you think your doctor from 30 years ago has your medical records? Probably. Or 50 years ago, they get thrown in the trash, or they get.
They got to hold on to them for 7 years at least.
Right.
So 10 years here in Ontario. Yeah.
Exactly. But they're setting rules about our data and how long these people should hold our data.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And so when looking at some of the images, and these are all concept things that I was sharing. There's another one that I have that's actually pretty realistic of how we do it today, but you've got here, let me just share this one last one, and we'll be because it's really quite amusing. Here we go.
Wrap up here.
This is a depiction of how we do things today. Oh, sorry. Did I just lose? Sorry about that. Let me bring it back. Where'd it go?
We need to wrap up here, Dina.
Okay, you got it. But I think you got the point quickly before I lost it. But next time, they're on my page if you guys are interested.
I love your illustrations; they're fantastic.
I agree.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. All right.
All right. Well, this has been great, guys. I wanted to, before we go, wrap up. There's a couple comments from the audience. A couple things from Claudio Silva about anonymization, including a link to a YouTube video that he's got about anonymization. People might want to check out. We'll share that in the show notes. And also Craig Erickson shared an interesting question and comment. He said that last year he discovered 237 health information exchanges, 30 of them with no privacy notice. Apparently anyone can start a health information exchange, and typically they get protected data directly from EHRs without explicit patient consent, in spite of consent management frameworks such as HIPAA. And apparently there's not a whole lot of people digging into this. So that's an interesting problem, right?
I'll take a stab at it. And I'll try to be brief so the other folks can comment too. But I think that's a little bit by design. HIEs in general were supposed to be allow for the exchange between hospitals and state and federal government and whatnot. And up until recently, they were kind of falling by the wayside because they were federal government funded. And at least under the last administration, they had cut off the dollars for that. So they are now trying to build them up again. They were trying to do it during COVID-19 because they thought it would be an easier and faster way to exchange data for some of the contact tracing. But ultimately, some of the interoperability laws that have passed several years ago are finally starting to kick in very slowly. There are several groups like the Sequoia Project that pull in multiple EMR companies to try to work together and share data. But I don't mean to sound like a conspiracy person, but I think part of it is by design, because if they start erecting some of the privacy laws, at least this was the thought before, it would delay the process of getting some of the data sharing going. But now with some of the laws that have been introduced because of Roe versus Wade being overturned, and the fact that they're using it to track people now, they think that the privacy laws will come up first before the interoperability is done. Sorry, long and run. I meant to be short.
Go for it on the conspiracy theories. They're real. They are. There's just,
all right. Well, I think we've got some great insight here. Any last comments before we go, folks? No? All right. Well, I think you've all had a great voice, and we appreciate your insights. I'm going to wrap it up here, and off we'll go. So I want to thank George Matthew from Daedalus North America, Dana Rivkin, Principal Cloud Architect and Lady Justice for the People, and Sima Fancy from TELUS Health. Hope you've all had a great show, and we hope we'll see you again at some point in the future. This has been your Bytes Your Rights, episode 23 on privacy of your health data. Hope you have a great weekend, everyone.
Thanks,
so much. Have a
everybody.
great weekend.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah, you're good. Thanks. Thanks, buddy. How you doing, Chris?